I'm Joe Shantanis. I lead the global interim strategy bench here at Investigo. We work with private equity businesses, corporates, consulting firms who are looking to access a network of independent strategy and management consultants from the likes of Bain, McKinsey, BCG, and various other consulting firms to support them with the likes of growth strategy, go-to-market, international expansion, M&A, due diligence, and transformation. Increasingly, we're seeing a demand amongst our customers for expert consultants who can use generative AI and come up with use cases for organizations to do stuff better. This is the video series that we're exploring exactly that topic. It's great to have you here, and hopefully you enjoy. Welcome to the Investigo part of the in-group interim strategy bench series, where we're looking at how generative AI is impacting the strategy consulting world. We're super fortunate to have Barry Whyte with us today, who's going to talk through some of these key topics. Barry, do you want to do an intro to yourself?
I'm Barry. I'm co-founder of an AI training school called Electric Sheep. We are London's first training centre for AI.
Cool.
And we work with a wide range of businesses, people who are scared about what AI might mean for their future strategy, and help quickly bring them up to speed. My background, I previously worked at Bain & Company. I then was at a edtech called Decoded for 5 years as COO. Decoded does a lot of digital transformation work. I then joined the Financial Times and set up a consulting practice there called FT Strategies.
Super fortunate and privileged to sort of have you here. So yeah, it'd be great to dive into that in a little bit more detail. Obviously, the sort of heavy emphasis of what we do, or certainly the team that I work in does, is around the world of strategy consulting. So it'd be super interesting to explore how you kind of came to work at Bain & Company, how you got your first role in strategy consulting, and what attracted you to that as a career in the first instance.
Yeah, so I joined Bain & Company out of business school. Prior to business school, I worked in advertising for 4 years. And the world of advertising was a great place to start my career. You really learn how to think about business from the perspective of a customer, which feels more relevant than ever when you're thinking about tech and building apps. But I was really frustrated by the limited scope of what we did. And strategy consulting really spoke to me because I got the opportunity to work with a wide range of businesses and really get stuck in with the main drivers of what makes that business successful. Great place to learn, and the connections that I made during my time at Bain stick with me today. And setting up my new startup, those connections have been immensely useful.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. Very consistent as well with what a lot of people in the world of strategy consulting sort of say. So what would you say is the kind of were the predominant topics that you tackled in your strategy consulting role? Were you looking at due diligence, growth, go to market? What were the key areas that you sort of focused on?
The projects that I really liked were really around growth, launching new things, digital transformation. My favorite project was probably working with a manufacturer of security alarms.
Okay.
And
niche.
Quite niche, right? But this was back in the early days of IoT,
right?
When the idea of having different connected devices around your house was still quite novel. So we did a massive project scoping out just what could you connect to an alarm system, looking at telemedicine devices, looking at fire alarms, etc., and basically scoping out these opportunities for launching new products and services. And that sort of project I found really, really fascinating. I was always a frustrated entrepreneur in the consulting world, and working on projects where we were talking about launching new products, entering new markets. Those are the projects that really excited me because I got to, I guess, release that inner founder, entrepreneur, but still while in that consulting world.
Yeah. And were you ever tasked with coming up with new propositions internally for Bain, or were you predominantly tasked with coming up with new propositions for your customers, or do you do a little bit of both?
So when I was at Bain, most of my work was client-facing.
Yeah.
But very recently, I've been supporting Bain on a new business unit they've set up called Consumer Lab,
right?
Where essentially they are projecting what the consumer of 2040 will look like, what they'll be buying, what their attitudes will be, how they'll behave.
Wow.
And that exposure to the internal knowledge creation unit of the consulting industry has actually been really fascinating.
Yeah, I bet.
It's something you often don't get access to when you're a junior consultant. But, that's where a lot of the magic actually happens.
Yeah, I bet. So the consumer of 2040.
Yeah.
That sounds fascinating and equally a little bit terrifying. How would they get information, and what kind of hypothesis are they basing the sort of information in the data on?
Yeah, so it's obviously really hard to predict the future.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of different routes. You can interview people who you think have a really strong understanding of new technologies that you think might be pivotal. To give an example, technologies around connected health. So people who are really immersed in that space have a view around what connected devices will be able to do in 10, 20 years' time. So many people are wearing glucose monitors now.
Yeah.
What's that going to look like in 10 years? What other things will we be able to track on our phones, and how would that be meaningful to us? You can speak to people who work in that space and really build an understanding. You can also look at the data, do a massive regression. And I guess you can also use AI.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure that plays a role, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, when we're talking about sort of the future of the consumer and how a lot of that data is kind of collected and predicted, one would envisage the sort of the rise of generative AI might play a role in that. Is it possible to give us a little bit more of a flavour of what that looks like?
If we think about generative AI and large language models, I think one of the overlooked use cases for large language models, we talk a lot about, using ChatGPT to generate emails or LinkedIn posts. We actually forget about how useful it can be to digest really, really, really large pools of information. So an academic paper or an entire library of academic papers, if you wanted to get a couple of very specific insights from those papers, if you wanted to ask some questions to the professors who wrote those papers, that's actually made astonishingly easy through LLMs. But that's often overlooked. There's just launched a couple of days ago, actually, Claude from Anthropic.
Yeah.
It happens to be particularly good at digesting really long documents, and you can then ask them very specific queries. Just earlier today, actually, we took McKinsey's generative AI report that was published around a month ago and asked Claude to summarize it into 5 bullet points.
Crazy, isn't it?
And it did it exceptionally well. I mean, mind-blowingly well.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely crazy.
Which is basically the exec summary slide.
Yeah. So should we just dive into strategy consulting a little bit more? Did you enjoy your role at Bain?
Generally speaking, yes. I think anyone who's ever worked in consulting will probably relate to this. Some cases are amazing. Some cases are absolutely dreadful.
Yeah.
But you only ever really remember the good parts. And all of those bad parts are actually really educational.
Yeah.
If, only to tell you what you don't want to do.
Yeah.
I think the connections that I made during that time are probably the thing that I lean on most. And, the people that I worked with, actually, generally speaking, were just a wonderful bunch.
Yeah. And do you find, because obviously you've subsequently been an independent consultant, obviously the work you did with FT Strategies, now as a kind of AI trainer consultant, do you find that the principles that you kind of gleaned or learned during your time at Bain, you adopt on more or less every new project you go on to when it comes to reviewing the stakeholders, your financial modeling skills, anything else that you'd look at as a consultant?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the great thing about strategy consulting is it teaches you how to take any problem that might seem utterly impossible to answer, then break it down into smaller steps that you can then work towards an answer for. Intriguingly, AI also happens to be really good at that as well. Yeah. So perhaps in the future, everyone's basically a strategy consultant. But that process of being able to take a question or a problem that feels impossible, break it down into component parts, break those down into subcomponents, and then start to work towards a point of view. I apply that to almost everything I touch.
I'm sure it's a super valuable skill, when going into new projects and thinking about business challenges and probably life challenges as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So do you envisage as well that the likes of Bain, McKinsey, etc., the top consulting firms are beginning to look at internal processes as it relates to generative AI and how they can do stuff in a more scalable way when it comes to their client propositions and how they run their processes?
Yes, absolutely. I can't speak for what is currently happening inside some of the larger firms, but the potential is immense. If you think about the sort of projects that a lot of consulting firms do, diligence
Yeah.
tends to be actually quite a lot of relatively simple bits of analysis,
Yeah.
but in quantity and at speed.
Yeah.
That is exactly what ChatGPT is good at.
Yeah.
And indeed, almost every other AI tool you can point to.
Yeah.
So that obviously has a massive impact on the way consulting firms work.
For sure. Yeah.
And indeed, it does bring into question the need to spend a lot of money on consulting firms for services such as diligence.
Yeah, I can see it being really, really useful in the likes of, heavy sets of desk research or deep dive, crunching through numbers and data analysis, etc. Do you think there would be a kind of bottleneck or challenge in terms of sharing, confidential information, particularly if it's primary information or primary data, quantitative data, with a language model or a chat GPT? Do you think clients of those consulting firms will resist the notion of putting their primary data through those kind of sources?
I think everyone's trying to navigate this at the moment. If I think about the conversations that I have every day with people who come to our Electric Sheep workshops, the most common question is, can I copy paste data from my organization and put it into ChatGPT or indeed any other Gen AI tool? And, what should my policy be? What sort of safeguards do we need to put in place? And there aren't really any answers to these questions right now. That's still very much work in progress. Anything you put into ChatGPT, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but it is used to train the model. So absolutely everything that goes in isn't private anymore.
Yeah.
That said, the chance of it coming out again
Yeah.
is relatively slim.
Yeah. There's never going to be a point at which someone can say, tell me the financial data of X business, is there? It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's used, what you're saying is the information that goes into it is enabling the model to get better at learning stuff.
Yes.
So you are sharing your information by definition, but you're not enabling any of your competitors, or you're not putting it anywhere sensitive in that regard.
If I uploaded my last bank statement and asked a question about my statement, hey, ChatGPT, do you want to sum up all of my expenditure in the month of May? We could probably do it.
Yeah.
Not tried that, by the way, but I probably could do it. But then if, Joe, you come along and say, hey, ChatGPT, tell me how much money Barry has in his bank account right now, I don't think it would be able to retrieve that specific piece of information, even though it had just received my bank statement.
Yeah, no. Makes complete sense. In terms of the sort of the current model or staffing models that you have within consulting firms, obviously it's a sort of very pyramid based model in the predominant strategy houses. Do you envisage there's going to be less requirement to be hiring, sort of addressing the elephant in the room, to be hiring analysts or people at the bottom of the organization who are responsible for churning through that information? And if the answer is yes, what are the long-term implications then on training up a volume of strategy consultants that can do the more high-level strategic work?
I think this question is being addressed in every single industry. The jobs that typically go to junior people, whether it's analysts at a consulting firm, junior lawyers at a law firm, illustrators at a design agency. Those roles are the easiest to replace with AI. And it does raise really serious questions about how will we train up that next generation of associates or indeed partners. I think the answer is probably to look at history. So, looking back to before PCs were widely adopted in the business world, there were a swathe of junior roles, whether it was typesetting at media houses or indeed human calculators. Do you know calculator was actually a human job before people invented the electric devices?
Yeah.
So those jobs were replaced and people just entered doing that slightly more skilled job.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're going to see. I think the definition of an entry-level role will just come with a bit less dog work.
Yeah.
You'll spend more time thinking about the consulting lens at a strategy consulting firm. At a junior level, you'll probably spend a bit more time doing work that today would look like associate level jobs.
Do you think that, or to what extent do you think that the strategy houses, are likely to start providing uniform instructions as to how to leverage generative AI, as opposed to everyone freestyling and applying their own lens on it?
I think every organization right now is working to produce guidelines around how their people should use Gen AI.
Yeah.
And there's no template for it. Everyone is scrambling to work it out for themselves.
Yeah.
I think what we'll probably see over the next 6 months is those templates actually becoming, more widely available. Best practice will start to emerge. And I have no doubt that strategy firms will start asking their staff to follow it to the letter. Yeah.
We've talked a fair bit as well around like due diligence and the kind of input of that goes into a strategy project. So market research, data crunching, looking at information on the webs, on the internet, looking at primary information, etc. The output of consulting is often slide decks.
Yep.
Were you involved in the creation of that kind of thing much when you were at Bain?
Making slides.
Yeah.
Yeah, my entire life.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah. And you would envisage that that's going to, take quite a big transformation as a result of generative AI, right?
Yeah. Just thinking about the creation of slide decks, slide decks are a really interesting space to watch within Gen AI. There are some startups out there that are trying to create auto slide deck tools. But none are really good.
Yeah.
In fact, they're all pretty awful. It's a huge opportunity because all the component parts are there. AI is great at generating charts from data. It's great at doing research to find that data. It's actually not too bad at design. No one's really packaged it together yet into a slide generation tool that actually could be used by a consulting firm. And I think the big opportunity is how do you move from novelty to something that's client ready?
Yeah.
And slides are a really good example. Perhaps we should set up that business.
Yeah, that feels like a serious opportunity to pursue.
Yeah.
And thinking about operational efficiencies within the consulting firms, I'm guessing like a fair bit of time gets spent, and thereby a fair bit of dollar gets spent on producing those kind of decks. That's going to save a lot of time, a lot of money, but also you'd think quite a lot of jobs moving forward.
Yeah. I think everyone will get a bit more efficient. So those slide decks will be generated a bit faster and the quality will be a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I think that's the opportunity in almost every industry that Gen AI presents. It's not about necessarily replacing a human. It's about making humans work a bit faster and work a bit better.
So talking about the likes of, Bain, McKinsey, BCG, it feels like a lot of those folks like the notion of moving into a role within a startup or a scale up. How do you view the skill set as parallel within those two worlds? How are strategy consultants, so successful within the world of startups and scale ups?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they probably fall into two camps. There's the first camp, and I'm definitely in that camp, of people who are attracted to early stage startups or founding their own ventures. And I think that sort of generalist toolkit that you build when you work in strategy consulting is invaluable there. You really can turn your hand to anything. It's almost a intrinsically entrepreneurial profession. Then you also get people who want to join scale ups. So people who want to join high growth businesses, perhaps they're 100, 200 people, and it's a question of where do I fit in? And I think for those people, roles like chief of staff are really interesting. Founders associate is a role that I've seen start to emerge just in the past few months. And that sort of right-hand man or woman to a founder is, I think, particularly suited to someone from a strategy consulting background who can build a bit of structure, rigor, and analysis around, the chaotic world of founding a new business or scaling a business.
Oftentimes as well, the startups and the scale ups, they're invested in by private equity organizations or venture capital firms, many of whom are often ex Bain, McKinsey, BCG. To what extent do you feel like the need or the drive to hire ex-MBB folk within those portfolio businesses or new venture businesses that are backed by VC or PE businesses are driven by the investors?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Over the past 3-4 years, lots of VC funds have started recruiting heads of talent, or they have some sort of talent function within their organization.
Yeah.
And those people help high growth companies find the right hires. And I think within funds, there is probably a slight bias towards looking for people with ex-strategy backgrounds, simply because those people are typically quite hard to find.
Yeah.
So heads of talent at VC funds can help put them into roles within their portfolio companies. That said, there's always a tension between VC funds wanting to place particular individuals into a startup and the startup founders perhaps being a little bit hesitant to accept recommendations from their investors. That tension, I think, is omnipresent.
So subsequent to your time at Bain, obviously, navigating a couple of other stops, you find yourself at the Financial Times, where you've since gone on to found FT Strategies, a well-known consulting firm within that space. It'd be great to hear your view on what that was like at the beginning. The task that was set with you initially with FTS, and what the first couple of months looked like.
FT Strategies is a boutique consulting firm within the Financial Times. It works with other media organizations, helping them build sustainable revenue models around their digital content. And that mostly takes the form of subscriptions. So helping newspapers, streaming services, and any other sort of media outlet that does something online build, keep, and retain and nurture their subscriber base. Initially joined the Financial Times on a 3-month consulting project.
Right.
And
so you were an interim consultant when you joined.
Yeah. And helping them think about a opportunity that the board could see to take all of the expertise, systems, technologies the FT had around its own subscription service and scale that to other newspapers.
Right, okay. So it wasn't a project in the first instance to apply some of these strategies to the Financial Times. That had already been established. The hypothesis was that there would be other organizations that would find this additive to their business models.
Yeah, at the start, we weren't necessarily looking to create a consulting firm. We were just looking to scale all of the expertise and systems.
Right.
The project was actually called monetization.
Okay,
so
right.
Can we take what's the cost center, maintaining the FT subscription service, all of the tech stack behind that. can we monetize it? Can we scale it? And we actually looked initially at building products. So could you take all of the subscription tech stack and white label it, then sell it to other newspapers? So other newspapers could run their content on FT Tech.
Yeah.
Long story short, we didn't do that.
Right.
But we discovered in the process of scoping that out that there was actually a massive opportunity for consulting expertise. So lots of other news organizations had very specific problems in very specific parts of their subscription funnel.
Yeah.
For some newspapers, it was all about converting casual browsers into subscribers. For others, it was about retaining subscribers they already had. For others, it was about pricing, tiered pricing, etc. And there was lots of expertise all over the FT in each of these different topics and more. So we set up FT Strategies as a way of taking that expertise out to other news organizations that needed it. And, it's not, you've got to remember, this is an industry where most players are struggling. So many newspapers are either going out of business or scrambling for investment money, or, reducing the size of their workforce simply to stay afloat. So taking all of the best practice from an organization that does it well and taking that to other smaller organizations who might not have the scale or funds to really invest in their own systems is really what inspired FT Strategies.
Yeah. Wow, super interesting. So obviously, I subscribe to the FT. There's a monetization element in the first instance when you subscribe, and that's consistent, across the sort of media landscape. But there's a lot of media outlets where you can subscribe for free or read their content for free. What are the other monetization strategies that they have? Is it predominantly around advertising and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so subscriptions make up the vast proportion of revenues at most well-run news organizations nowadays. There is still money from advertising, but that market is in constant flux and has become a bit more specialized. For example, fashion advertising in the glossy newspaper supplements is actually a very buoyant market. Advertising in the main print newspaper actually tends to not really generate that much revenue.
Right. Yeah. And so you mentioned at the beginning as well that you kind of took this product to market. There wasn't necessarily a need for the initial hypothesis around what you took to market, but you identified that there was a consultancy proposition. How did you kind of start creating approaches to scale that when it was just you on your own at that point?
Yeah, so when we initially scoped out this product, we did a classic pivot. So we were scoping out a white label tech platform. We noticed there was another opportunity to sell services, and we basically just tested a bunch of different propositions with various potential clients. We were very lucky in that the FT name instantly opens doors.
Yeah.
So, in my current business, I email people randomly from Electric Sheep, and I'd say, like 1 in 20 people reply. Whereas I can guarantee you, when you email someone from the FT, everyone replies.
For sure.
And that makes setting up a new venture inside an organization like that just a phenomenally wonderful experience. Because you really get those doors open for you that, we often struggle to open as entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And, when a door is open to you to pitch, you just see what works.
Yeah.
So we would, and it was myself plus one other person, we would go to a client lead, someone who had expressed some interest in what we were building.
Yeah.
We'd try and sell them something. If they said, no, we'd work out why. And then the next person we spoke to, we would just change our pitch
Just tweak it slightly.
and just tweak it slightly,
Yeah.
and just keep on doing that until we got a sense of product market fit.
Yeah. No, coming at it from the sort of interim recruitment perspective, I'm always interested at, how consulting firms land their projects, because obviously at some point they've got to showcase the individuals that are going to be on the project. How were you guys doing that at the beginning? How do you as a consultancy showcase that it's going to be top talent on the project while simultaneously enabling yourself to scale and go into other pieces of work?
Yeah, this is any business, whether it's consulting or training, that relies on intelligent people who have a direct relationship with the clients. All businesses with that format struggle to disassociate the proposition that they're selling from the individual who will be supplying it. And it's hard because if you're running a consulting firm, you don't necessarily want to promise a particular person because that person might be on another project, they might be sick, they might have left you by that point and joined another firm. So you really need to build a sense of identity and credentials for the firm itself. You need to build a sense of IP, even if you don't have any. You need to build a sense of that so that they're purchasing the firm rather than purchasing the individual.
And purchasing presumably as well the process, the IP. This is what you're buying into. This is the the process we're going to take you on. We're pros at doing so, and it's not contingent on the individual being the person who delivers it.
Definitely, and there's two different types of people you might have on a proposal. So you might have the team who'd be working on it on a day-to-day basis, and those are the people who you want to keep a bit interchangeable. But then you have the experts as well. So that could be senior people in your organization. It could be external experts who you have an agreement with. In the case of the FT, we had access to like a wide range of talent within that organization, whether editorial or commercial. And highlighting those experts are often a route to demonstrating you have really quality people, but without promising them to a particular client to work on a particular project.
Yeah, for sure. And did you find yourself from the get-go productizing your approaches? So once you got a case study in and your credentials in, would you then take that, basically a carbon copy of that process to another organization who you thought might be in a similar situation, or do you go in and try and write bespoke every single time you go and do a pitch?
Now, you've got to productize it. Quite simply, you don't make money in the consulting world unless there is a layer of productization. And that's also how you build IP. You do something and then you draw out the key lessons from that, and then you make that available to the wider firm so that they can then take those lessons to other clients, and obviously do that in a way that respects client confidentiality. But there's professional standards are very well established to ensure that always happens.
In the interim market, there's two means by which a client might engage your services. On the one hand, you could say to them, have you thought about this problem? You need to think about this problem. Here's an individual who can help you solve that problem. That's more of a proactive taking a product or a service to market. And then there's someone who comes to you inbound. They've got a very clearly defined scope and they say, can you help me find someone to do this? In consultancy, which way does it often come in? Are you more going and proactively pitching a requirement, or are you waiting for someone to come to you and say, I'd like to do this, can you build a team to do it?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. So essentially the way a lot of consulting firms operate, they build a piece of knowledge or expertise. For example, it could be a benchmarking tool for, I don't know, podcast studios, and they then have some thoughts around what best practice for podcast studios looks like. They can then shop that around different podcast studios and say, hey, look, we know everything about podcast studios. We can tell you how to run the perfect podcast studio. But very few podcast studios will be like, oh yeah, I want that. What they will probably say is, oh, so you seem like an expert. Here's a problem I'm having. Do you know how we can solve it?
Yeah.
So it's a sort of fine balance between those two things.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Super interesting stuff. And obviously there was a heavy digital component to the proposition with FTS. To what extent do you think that the likes of generative AI and all the SaaS products that are AI based now are going to have an impact in the media space more broadly?
So I think the media industry is going to really be fundamentally transformed by generative AI. It already is. It's a bit of a dirty word within some news organizations still, but using generative AI tools to do the first 40-50% of drafting a piece,
Yeah.
I think will become commonplace.
You mean like journalism?
Yes.
A piece in a sort of outlet like an FT or whatever it may be.
Yeah. I think you're going to get smaller publications adopting this first.
Yeah.
I think, it'll be large organizations, the FT, the Times, the Wall Street Journal, have really large editorial and journalism and reporter teams who are highly skilled and able to churn out really high quality copy at quantity. It's going to be the smaller publications really that start to utilize Gen AI more rapidly in their day-to-day work.
Yeah.
So a lot of smaller publications are really struggling to run an efficient newsroom because journalists are expensive and not much revenue is coming in the door. Gen AI can help solve that problem. You can use Gen AI tools to draft the first 40, 50, 60% of a piece. Then the job is much more about adding your own flourish to it, thinking outside the box, doing all the things that AI tools can't. It also can take over the job of being a sub-editor. So looking at the final copy, revising it, making sure it's in house style, etc. And those things just make newsrooms much more efficient.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see smaller media organizations, the ones that are really struggling, start to utilize these tools pretty soon if they're not already.
Yeah.
And as they become more established in the industry, you'll start seeing that trickling upwards towards the larger publications. And, the day when news organizations like the Wall Street Journal or the Times start using Gen AI in the newsroom, they're probably just,
It's pretty much the same story, isn't it, with all organizations? It feels like everyone's now got this opportunity to generate a ton of content really easily, very quickly across a range of different topics. Obviously, the extent to which you're smart with your prompt enables you to come up with, a good amount of content. I just wonder if, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the media space. It could be across organizations generally. There will now be a premium on authentic, human-driven content. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I don't like
definitely.
the notion of getting my news from an AI bot.
Yeah, I think we've seen this across digital media generally. The rebirth of vinyl records. There's this craving for something real, and people pay a premium for something that feels real.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see that more and more as content is created by AI. We don't talk too much about it at the moment because the technology is not quite there.
Yeah.
But AI generated music is going to be big within a year.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a seismic difference between listening to a song that sounds like a guitar song, but it's been generated by AI. It might be fantastic and sound great in the radio, but that's going to be very, very different to listening to someone play an acoustic guitar in a pub.
Yeah.
And I think we'll start to see people pay more and more of a premium for the realness of that experience, in spite of the AI generated guitar song probably being a bit better.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I can't at this stage see myself being too into an AI driven piece of music, but you never know, right? And also, knowing how sort of generative AI works, surely there's going to be a ton of copyright challenges around that, because you might be able to take, I don't know, Ed Sheeran's best song, put it into one of these tools and say, write me 10 similar ones. There must be a lot of challenges around that kind of thing.
Yeah, like as I'm sure most people now know, that's literally how all AI generation engines work. They look at millions of pieces of source material and then combine it together intelligently to come up with something new, but it's actually just derivative of, tens of thousands of pieces that came before it.
But the argument would be that all songs are already derivative of other people's music in a way, right? It's just done by a human.
They always are, yeah. That said, though, the one thing AI is really bad at, and whether it's music or using ChatGPT for brainstorming or using Midjourney for image generation, really bad at thinking outside the box, really bad at coming up with something completely wacky and new. When we were trying to think of a name for Electric Sheep, we gave a naming brief to ChatGPT, and we, obviously used best in class prompt engineering techniques. And got lots of actually really good, plausible names out of it. It was quite creative.
Yeah.
If you'd done a naming session with a team of people and came out with the list that ChatGPT generated, you'd feel pretty good about the day.
Yeah.
But none of them were outside the box. They were all actually very, very, very firmly inside the box.
Yeah, none of them that wacky.
None of them wacky. No Electric Sheeps.
Yeah, fine. You can't see ChatGPT coming up with Dark Side of the Moon, like a Pink Floyd album anytime soon or anything like that.
Exactly. There's, and I think there is still, original content to be made. Humanity's not exhausted every single last idea just yet.
For sure.
And if anything, actually, AI might force us to actually be a bit more innovative and think outside the box a bit more, because that's what humans are really good at.
Yeah.
We could have just used AI to create this podcast. We could have taken a sample of your voice, my voice, some photos of us, used some video synthesis tools. Your team at Investigo could have written a great script, and this could all be automated.
Yeah.
But we've chosen to do this in real life.
Or have we?
We need to do something wacky and out the box just to prove it to people.
Yeah,
what
that's
would
true.
AI not do?
Yeah.
AI wouldn't eat a plant.
No, that's true. That is very true. That's incredibly terrifying at the same time for a lot of people, isn't it? And I think the notion of the capabilities around that are actually what put a lot of people off the idea of leaning into generative AI. How do you view the sort of the evolution of our being accustomed to generative AI around that kind of thing moving forward?
So being accustomed to, say, content being created
about where specific individuals are in it, but it's not them, for example.
So this entire idea of creating content based on a person's face, voice, and they don't actually have to be there. It's starting to gain real traction, and there are some very, very valid and wonderful use cases for it. The one that I've most commonly seen is corporate training videos. So, SaaS companies will often want their account manager to deliver a training course to a particular organization. And there are all sorts of SaaS tools now that allow those companies to put the person's face and voice on a script and kind of scale that person.
That's scary though, isn't it? Surely, like on the flip side to that, you could then, someone with the wrong intentions could get on camera. For those listening to this, I put that in inverted commas, because they wouldn't be on camera doing something incriminating, and thereby put them in a challenging situation. That's got to be an ethical implication that people have got to watch out for.
Absolutely. But then, I think thinking critically is more important than ever, and we've all had to develop critical thinking skills over the course of the past 10 years as stories have been spread on social media, especially thinking back to elections 5-6 years ago, when there was a lot of disinformation, and social media platforms weren't quite as good as they are now at regulating that. We all got really good at spotting what was a fake news story versus what a real news story was. At least most of us got good at it. Some people still haven't caught up. And I think, that's that need for critical thinking is just going to exacerbate. We need to be able to understand when we're looking at a deep fake versus when we're looking at the real Joe.
Yeah.
So we're going to develop those skills. It might not seem obvious to us immediately, just as spotting fake news wasn't really obvious to us 5-6 years ago when they first started to spread.
Yeah.
But we will develop those skills.
How far off the technical capability to effectively automate an entire marketing campaign inclusive of video content that has individuals who work at those firms? How far off do you think we are technically from being able to do that?
I think we can pretty much do that today.
Yeah.
All the component parts are out there to create a fully automated marketing campaign, whether it's video synthesis, voice synthesis, writing scripts, hyper personalizing scripts to a particular customer.
Yeah.
Imagine a future scenario where a candidate logs on to the Investigo website and it's you speaking to them directly. Hey, Barry. Like the technology is there to make that happen if there's a use case for it.
Yeah.
And it's just a case of stitching the various systems together.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a use case for it. In recruitment companies, you can see, just hearing you say that, you're like, wow, that'd be powerful. That would drive, a ton of personalization to each individual. That would drive a ton of operational efficiencies across the organization. Considering the fact that we're already there technically now, why do you think more businesses aren't already jumping on this? Because it feels like I haven't seen that many that are doing this end-to-end kind of personalized marketing campaign by really leaning into Gen AI. Why do you think many businesses haven't quite yet cottoned onto it?
Yeah, hyper-personalization using Gen AI, I think, will be the next big marketing trend to watch for. I think we've not seen that much of it to date, simply because it's such a new technology. The vast majority of people in the marketing world, and indeed the world generally, only started to realize the potential of AI at the beginning of this year. And people are still getting their heads around the opportunities that it presents. The people who created these systems actually really struggled to identify use cases for them. I went to a talk last night where someone was talking about some of the leading developers of LLMs. And in the early days, they were apparently struggling to work out how anyone was going to use them. They felt like an academic novelty. But now people are building use cases. Thinking about hyper-personalization, the technology's there, but people are still very new to it. They're still working out not only what opportunities does it present for their business, but how do I integrate this into my existing workflows? And how do I connect it to all of the other systems that I'm using? I think hyper-personalization is a thing to watch. Could you imagine a future where a candidate lands on the Investigo website? The website's already looked at their LinkedIn profile, so it can speak to a candidate directly, feeding particular content depending on where they used to work, and having a sort of making a judgment call on what they might be interested in.
Yeah, you can imagine the conversion rate from individual coming to website and converting on the form by virtue of the increased personalization in their experience being dramatically higher as a result of that kind of thing. And it also makes me think, the big businesses that are currently established, that they're going to be a little bit more bloated. They're going to have a lot more a lot slower processes. It takes longer for them to change. The businesses that have their organizations set up that way at the moment are now subject to really small challenger brands coming along and changing the game and really taking a lot of their market share, who can be much more agile around that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll see, just thinking about direct to customer brands, I think we'll start seeing those brands use hyper personalization, you know, very, very, very soon. I'm sure in 3 months' time, if we were doing this podcast, I'd probably have a bunch of case studies at my fingertips.
Yeah.
But they just haven't happened yet. But the technology's there, so it's just a matter of time. And like any technology, smaller players are faster at adopting it. It's going to be, years before you see the big hitters start to successfully utilize AI, but you'll see startups
Yeah.
utilizing it quite quickly.
But if you can get through that level of, personalization, for example, being the first one that we're going to talk about, and thus boost conversions to such an extent, you're going to find that those businesses, if they don't, the bigger companies, if they don't get on it in the next 6 to 12 months, they're going to really lose a ton of market share, you would think.
Absolutely. Strategy ultimately is all about competitive advantage, and AI presents probably the most remarkable opportunity for competitive advantage that we've probably encountered in our lifetimes. And that is game changing for the businesses that adopt it first.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a massive first mover advantage here if you're able to start using AI within your business and you're able to just very, very quickly align your team behind an AI strategy. You will have that advantage and it will produce immediate results.
Yeah, well, personalization is obviously a big part of the use case when it comes to marketing, go to market. Have you seen anything else, or to what extent are you seeing other trends within the world of marketing that are being driven by AI? Whether it be content, audience generation by automation, scaling campaigns, etc.
You know, if I think about something that's very relevant to me right now, I have a young B2B startup, and a lot of what we want to do is generate business leads. We want people who are within our target demographic landing on our website so we can convert them into customers. And that process of going out and finding leads used to be really, really labor intensive, And I'm not talking about 30 years ago. I'm talking about, just a couple of years ago when we had a massive boom in B2B SaaS services. All of these SaaS companies hired legions of BDRs, business development reps, who would, or SDR, sorry, who would go out and try and find new customers, doing lots of outbound. And they would spend their days trolling LinkedIn, writing emails and LinkedIn messages to people who might be in the target demographic, and creating content posts for LinkedIn, hoping that will convert to some inbound. A lot of that stuff can now be automated. I use a tool, for example, which is a AI-powered SDR, sales development rep. And essentially, I just give it some parameters. And this tool goes out there, finds people who meet my brief. I then tell them who's good and who's not. It learns from that.
Yeah.
So the next set of people it delivers to me will be a little bit more on brief. Then from different sources, we'll go out and find their email addresses. It will construct an email that's hyper personalized to them. It's not very good at that bit yet, but I'm sure it'll get there. And then if I want, I can put it on autopilot and it'll just reach out to these people directly for me.
Yeah. Wow. So you take that outbound opportunity, and you've effectively driven a crazy amount of capital efficiency in these startups and scale-ups that used to have to really go to market and find BDRs and stuff.
Yeah.
And also thinking about the inbound opportunities, because a lot of B2B buyers now and B2C buyers, they want to go to a site, they want to gain information, they want to learn about the product themselves in a kind of autonomous fashion. So if you had that BDR piece being done to some extent by generative AI, and you've got personalized messaging when you come to a website and you're doing your research, the opportunities around marketing and sales feel pretty revolutionary, right? And they're, like, they're really going to change the game.
Absolutely. Marketing, sales, account management, They're all very, very high touch roles. And high touch is a way of saying lots of people. You know, most tech organizations have like more salespeople than developers. Um, and those roles are the roles that can be automated. And that just, to use your words, transforms your capital efficiency. That said, that automation isn't necessarily cheap in itself. So not only do you have to pay for a tech platform, for example, the AI-powered SDR that I use comes with a hefty subscription fee, as you'd expect.
Yeah.
But they also have to query GPT. And OpenAI keys don't actually come cheap.
Yeah.
So if you start making a lot of queries to GPT-4, the cost of that can actually quite quickly
Scale
add
up
up.
quite quickly.
So it's not, you're not completely eliminating your cost base. It's not some
No.
utopia where everything is now free. You're actually replacing people cost with a lot of software service costs.
Yeah, but there's a capital efficiency piece which is around reducing cost of staff, but then there's also the notion of how quick, you know, these tools are going to be doing A/B testing and becoming more efficient actually in terms of how they go to market than you'd think a human ever could. They're not going to have a day off. They're not going to stop working. They're not going to have a weekend. They're not going to take Christmas off. And they're also going to be constantly optimizing and scaling in the right direction as to where they have conversions significantly better than any BDR ever could, right?
Definitely. I think where that starts to get really interesting is when you allow these systems to go on autopilot to make executive decisions. So for example, you talked about A/B testing there. You can use an AI system to create, say, 2 forms of copy to run as A/B tests. Do you allow that system to choose which one is most successful and then implement that automatically? Or do you have a human checking that decision?
Yeah.
And I think that's a question that is actually harder to answer. You know, for example, I mentioned that I use an AI-based SDR. I would never trust that SDR to actually send an email from my name.
No.
I still want to review everything.
For sure.
Similarly, if you're doing an A/B test, I'd never trust the AI tool to decide which version of final copy to run. I would still want to look at the data and make that call myself.
Yeah.
If AI is going to make a recommendation, great, I'd love to see that. But I still want to make that executive decision myself.
Yeah. But at least you now have the information, which I think a lot of the time, you know, when you're using an old school or traditional team of outbound sales folk, and, you know, existing marketing strategies, it'd be very difficult to get predictable, reliable information around what your funnel looks like and what the different campaigns and the different optimizations look like. Whereas now you can presumably look at it with all that information and thereby make a much better business decision without necessarily relying on the tool to make the decision for you.
Yes, definitely. You know, one of the downsides of this is too much information paralysis.
Yeah.
And a word that I hear more and more in the AI space, especially among non-technical people who are trying to wise up on AI, is overwhelming.
Yeah.
People feel overwhelmed with the amount of advice out there around how to best use AI tools. And similarly, as AI tools start to create lots of data for us to, or lots of reports, you know, there's no point generative AI generating stuff unless people read it. But people only have capacity to read so much. And I think people are increasingly feeling overwhelmed, and I think that's going to get much worse.
The opportunities that it poses do seem pretty amazing and pretty broad, right? Like, it feels like you could now come up with a product idea. You could come up with a range of different hooks to market that product. You could come up with a range of different creative to market those hooks. You could come up with a range of different value propositions, a range of different audiences, channels, and price points and find the winner automatically, which
Yeah.
is pretty unbelievable when you look at it like that.
I mean, it's crazy. Yes, you know, a lot of that stuff happens already, but there's a human involved.
Yeah.
Um, you know, intermediating between the different systems and making decisions, um, stitching it all together, and taking some of those decisions away from humans and making those decisions really fast. I think it will be game changing.
What about the kind of the future of consulting then? Obviously, historically speaking, consulting firms have built their organizational structure in a pyramid fashion, under the notion that people will progress through the organization to manager, senior manager, and partner level. What will that look like moving forward in the absence of a requirement of so many analysts and associates?
You know, I think there still will be analysts and associates. I think they'll just do slightly different jobs. So I think you'll still have some sort of pyramid structure in most firms, but the roles people do at each stage of that pyramid will differ. You know, using tech tools has always been part of the job, and using tech tools that are based on AI systems will now become part of that job description, and it will make work a bit more efficient. But it won't make the roles themselves necessarily redundant. They'll just be doing slightly different things. And that's happened with pretty much every new tech tool that's come our way over the past 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
I'm sure the job of an analyst now is actually quite different to the job of an analyst when McKinsey was founded, like 100 years ago or so?
Yeah.
And, you know, that will continue to evolve. You know, we've seen a trend in the consulting world over the past 5 years, maybe longer, where that traditional model has split apart and started to become a bit more matrix. For example, different skill sets within consulting firms, you know, product teams, developers, data analysts, etc., playing much more of a central role in client case teams rather than just 4 generalists plus a manager. And I think we might see that trend continuing, and some of those additional roles within that organizational structure will start to be AI based. So, you know, experts in particular AI systems, dare I say, prompt engineers.
Do you think we'll come to a time when we see an actual bot form part of a case team, whether it be for data analysis or actually for communicating some information with clients? Do you think that's on the agenda or on the cards at all for consulting firms?
I think some clients might already think they have a robot in some of their case teams, but yes, I do actually. You know, the word robot is quite evocative, but if we just look at data analysis products, so a lot of the major consulting firms over the past 10 years have been developing various products that are sold alongside consulting services, and they're usually, you know, very specific analysis or benchmarking tools, and you know, including a software tool as part of the solution to a client case. That's actually established, and it's a growing trend already. And I think software tools which are based on AI and, you know, perhaps they're a chatbot, I think that actually is going to be a very real reality. There's probably already a case study out there where it's happened already.
I'll be super interested to hear a little bit more around electric sheep, what you guys are doing, what the kind of demand hypotheses are for when customers come to you, and yeah, what makes you guys different?
Yeah, so Electric Sheep is London's first training centre for AI. We focus on professionals, people who aren't software developers or data analysts, and often they're playing around with AI tools. They can see the potential. They just don't know how to land it in their day-to-day jobs. They want to use AI tools to improve their productivity, perform better, improve their output, and generally live a better life. But they just don't necessarily know where to start.
Yeah.
And we created a 3-hour workshop called AI Essentials. You can come along as an individual, just book a spot on our website, electricsheep.training, or you can bring your team and we'll customize that workshop to your organization's specific challenges, your tech systems, etc. And at the end of that 3-hour workshop, you'll be able to instantly implement some of the learnings into your day-to-day working life. And attendees tell us that just that one 3-hour workshop can save them around about an hour off every working day.